All right, so I am going to show you guys around Blender. I don't know if you've done any tutorials with it yet or not, or if you're familiar with everything, but um, I'm definitely not super familiar with it, but hopefully I can show you at least how to make the book. So I guess we'll just get started. Um, so when you start up everything, you comes up with this. Don't do anything with it, just click outside of it. And it will have already populated a small scene for you with a cube, a camera, and a lamp. So this is your light source, this is your rendering source, and this is your object. So if you were to come over here and hit render, this is what you would see. So just hit escape to get out of that. Um, so this area here is um, mostly it's sometimes called your viewport or your canvas, or um, in lots of different stuff it has lots of different names. Um, but that mainly is what I will call the viewport. Um, and then obviously you can see a couple different menus along the side. Um, this one over here is probably your most important menu. This one just shows you what all's in here, so you can come over here. This is called the outliner, and this one's called your properties. So if you ever lose these, you can put them back. Same with all of this. I mean, it's just more of the same thing. This is the timeline. Um, this one is not one of these um, browsers or tables or widgets, whatever you want to call it. This is specific most of the time to um, the different objects that you choose. Um, and to hide that, you just hit T, and that toggles it on and off. Um, Sometimes it's useful, but most of the time you probably won't need it. What's nice about Blender is how much you can customize your view inside of the specific project you're working on because of the um, simplicity of cleaning it out. So, say you wanted um, a different view of your object while you worked on it, you can come up here to these little three stripes. There's one in the top right corner and bottom left corner of every viewport. And if you wanted to just make another one, you could either pull up and that will bring you another view. And to get rid of it, all you have to do is to get rid of the one you just created or any of them that are underneath, grab the one you want and drag it into it, and that's going to get rid of it. So if you click and pull to the left or right, it'll split the viewport vertically. If you grab the um, three little lines here and pull down or up, it'll split it horizontally. Um, so now that I've split these here, I cannot come over to this one and close these out. It won't let me close out, and it's because it's separated by these two. You have to clean it up and make them proportional in order to um, get them to work properly. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this timeline, and I'm going to get rid of the outliner as well, because I really only want these necessarily. Um, Next, I'm going to show you just kind of how to navigate around in the viewport here. And what's most important is how to select different objects. So as you can see here, I'm just moving the cursor and selecting each object. To deselect, you just press A. And to select all, you press A again. So the more that I press A, the more it's selected and deselecting. Um, you can also press B, and that brings up the large cursor, and that will allow you to drag a box over an object or over a couple points or whatever you're working on to select multiple things. And if you press B and click on the middle mouse button and drag, that will deselect. What else you can do to select is press C, and that is circle select. And so that means when you click, now anything you brush over will be selected somehow. Okay, yeah, there, see? Um, and so then just press escape to get out of it and press A to deselect. Um, to select, it comes, the Blender comes stock that you have to click the right mouse button. But if you come up here to File, User Preferences, in the Input tab down here with Select, go ahead and change that to left click because not only is that the most common um, option in most other uh, 3D modeling softwares or modeling softwares in general, um, I've heard that Blender is hoping to move over to left click as its default um, select. So when you click left, go ahead and then hit Save User Settings, and that will save it for the next time that you open this up. Next, let's go ahead and rotate around the 3D view. So what you're going to do is click down on the middle mouse button and use that to scroll around or to rotate around wherever your um, cursor here is. If I were to select an object, it's still going to focus on wherever this little cursor is. So so now that I switched the select preference to left, when you click on the right mouse button, what happens is it moves your um, focus. Okay, well, I messed that one up because that's not what happens. I don't know why I thought if I press A, what happens then? No, nothing. All right, well, so this is to orbit and rotate around an object. But say you wanted to just move side to side. What you can do is hold Shift and click down on the middle mouse button, and that will allow you to pan left and right, up and down. Um, and it's really helpful for when you're trying to just get across a larger surface or trying to get the right view that you want, and you don't want to be orbiting around. Um, and it allows you to move that focus of the orbit as well. Um, so next, I guess we can talk about moving objects in the space. There's quite a few ways to move an object. So if you say you click on it, what you'll see here is this little um, widget, gumball, object, whatever gimbal type thing. It's all the same thing. People call it different things, but this is called um, like in Rhino, it's called the gumball. And what that does is it allows you to select specific vertices to move an object on. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control Z to move that back. This is the X axis, Control Z. This is the Y axis, and this is the Z axis. Um, what's really nice about Blender is that it has a bunch of um, shortcuts. So say I want to move this lamp around. Um, all I have to do is select it, and I can hit G, and that will allow me to move it wherever I want. Um, but it's kind of awkward to be moving it in this view, and you can't really pan. So if you hold down the middle mouse button, it will bring up the the X, Y, and Z axes as a um, guide to help you move. Unfortunately, you can only move it in that direction. So then, and it's locked to that singular point from when you first started to move. So what you can do is when you click, it lets you then whichever guide you're on and you let go, it locks to that specific um, position or that specific axis. Um, but if you wanted to change it up, it's still locked to these to this initial point. So you'll have to go across, click G, middle mouse button, Z, click G, middle mouse button along the Y, click, and move it that way. And that's just a little bit faster and a little more, it gives you a little bit more um, exact movement than necessarily always choosing to move it with these. So whichever way you decide to move it, um, it's no problem. I mean, it's up to you, really. There's a way to turn it off down here. Let me think of how to do it. Nope, not that. There it is. Okay, yeah, so if you click this, it shuts it off. So press A to deselect. Um, so now we're orbiting, we're panning, we are moving objects, and um, now let's get to how to kind of start with building out the form and adjusting this object. So instead of using this object, let's go ahead and hit X let's deselect. You got to select it first, hit X, and then delete. X is the shortcut for deleting it. You can also hit the delete key on your keyboard if you prefer that way. Um, and then let's hit add down here, mesh, and cube. And that will put it wherever that 3D cursor was last placed. Um, go ahead and hit X and delete. Now another way to add that is to press Shift A, and the first option that comes up is mesh here and gives you the exact same menu. So most of the time you're going to be wanting to use mesh, especially for just quick or beginner level work, and as you get going, adding different surfaces and different pieces could be helpful. But for the most part, mesh will be the most important one for you to use. So go ahead and add that cube back in, and um, what was the button? Oh, if you press the um, period symbol on your numpad, it will focus to the object that you have selected. And so I'll just zoom out a little bit. And yeah, so now that this is selected, let's go ahead and see how we can scale this. So if you hit S, wherever your cursor is going to be the start of how you are able to scale. It automatically starts working as soon as you press that button. Um, but what's nice about this is that you can actually choose which axis you want to scale, just like when you were moving the box and different lamps or stuff around. So while you're in um, the scaling tool, go ahead and press the X key, and that will limit the scale to that X axis. So you can only move it along the X axis. And what we can do with that is get it to a narrow enough stance that it kind of looks like the pages, the width of pages within a book. But if you pan around, it's still square, and I don't know too many books that are square, so press S again and press Y, and that will now start to allow you to scale it in the Y direction. And so now that we have this, let's go to do something a little bit more complicated, but it's pretty simple with what we have here. Um, if you come down here with the box selected and click on object mode, it'll pull up this menu here. Mainly, you probably won't ever use these, at least not for a while. Um, the main other mode that you're going to use is edit mode. That brings up the different pieces that you can edit. Down here kind of shows you what those different pieces are. You have vertices, which are these individual points at the vertice of each face. You have the edge, which is the edge of each face. And then you have the faces themselves. And that's the one we're going to use to help make the cover of this book. So go ahead and come down here and select the Face Select tab. And let's select the front. Hold down Shift and select the back. You can let go of Shift and pan back around and hold down Shift again to select the back side of the cover. So now that we have this, what we're going to want to do is press Shift D. Now what that does is it duplicates those faces. Um, we don't, we have it, right now it's locked to our cursor movement, which is fine. We don't want to click somewhere outside of where this is because we'll have to get into snapping back to this object. What we want to do is press escape. That will leave these faces selected, which we want, because we have another command that we want to press, which is P, and that is to separate. And so you can separate by a couple different options, but in this case we're going to use by selection. And what that will do is that changes what layer the face that we just made and the object we had made previously, what layer those are on. So if I go ahead and pull this down and switch it to the outliner, you can see we have cube 001 and cube. So cube, if I move, whoops, uh, if I move this, is just the um, initial cube that we made, and cube 01 is that cover. So go ahead and hit escape, and that'll pop back to where it was. So that's good. Now that we have those separated, what we want to do is give this cover some thickness. Now that we have this separated, what we want to do is give it a more of a book binding impression. So go ahead and hit S to scale it. You don't want to scale it in all directions, so go ahead and hit Z. that will give you the option to scale it in the Z direction, and that will give it the nice book lip look. But it's still, the pages are flush with the front here. So what we want to do is come over here to the cube and come down here to edit mode. So another way to go into edit mode is to hit tab. So now we're in object mode, hit tab again, and that's in edit. And so that'll switch back and forth. Now that we're in edit mode, make sure you're selecting a face and click on that front face of those pages and hit G and Y to go in the Y direction, and that will push that back just about the same distance that we moved them up. And so there is a general shape of a book, but if you see here, you can see these lines. If I hit tab and come out into object, press A to deselect, you see this little dotted line here. This is where two faces are intersecting and overlapping one another. And so if we were to try and render, you get this flickering effect happening on the face. A good way to give this, or well, I guess one way to give this depth would be to go into edit mode after having selected the cover and press E. Well, sorry. Go into edit mode, select the face that you want to extrude, which is all of them, right? And press E. That's extrude. But you notice that that doesn't really work. So maybe what we need to do is select a single face. That works a little bit, right? So you can select the face here, uh, select the face here, select the face here, and there's kind of a book binding, but you have this ridge here and it just doesn't really look very symmetrical. This side's thicker than this side. Go ahead and Control Z all that. Now with the book cover selected, we're going to go to the properties menu over here. We're going to find this wrench, which is the object modifiers. So what this does is it allows for several different options, such as like if we hit array, we could choose, this allows for the distance from array, but we could make a bunch of different book covers, and we could choose the direction and distance and the different separations and all of that. But we don't want array. What we want to give thickness to this cover is solidify. So what you can see this is doing is adding that thickness to our cover. And it doesn't need to be super thick. I don't know why it's so thick there in the back, but of course I guess backs are normally pretty thick. Okay, we're gonna retry that one. Of course I don't know why it's so thick here in the back, but there we go. That's basically all we need for a proper book 3D model. And in Unity or in A-Frame, we'll be able to scale this however we need to. This is really all that you would need to get this up and running. So let's see if we can get that to look all right in the render frame. No, because the lamp is over here. Lamp needs to come down Y, up. Here we go. Now let's see the rendering. There we go. Change that to cycles. Re-render that. There. A little bit softer. Doesn't need to be perfect, right? So that is how we can make a very simple book using Blender, and it really doesn't take much time at all. But getting used to kind of how things work, how it runs, all that kind of stuff is the hardest part, really, I think. Um, so another really good tutorial that I would suggest to look up and find is search on YouTube for Blender Guru. This guy right here, he has a really good playlist for beginners right here. Blender Beginner Tutorial Series, where he will go over a lot of some of the same stuff that I went over in this tutorial, but in a little bit longer of a format, clearly with uh, 10, 9 parts, 10 if you count the introduction. Um, in the introduction, he mostly just talks about why you should use Blender, which I suggest watching. It's interesting. But starting with um, the part one and working all the way through, you'll learn how to not only 3D model, but set up some particle effects, do some slight animation, and also how to render and composite an image so that you guys can start setting up your 3D models to show them off and put them into your portfolios and such. He talks about the material editor in Blender, which is really cool. Um, and frankly, I just think it would be a big benefit to you guys to learn it, and this would be a really quick way to get into it. Um, and I think it could be really beneficial, especially for um, doing different art pieces and for setting up things in VR, like in A-Frame, you can start making your objects, giving them materials and bringing them into A-Frame and compositing around them um, with some of the different techniques you guys are learning in A-Frame. And then as you get more invested into Unity, you can work with that stuff as well. So thank you for watching, and let me know if it helped you at all, because that's pretty cool. Thanks.